This is a Sandler training audiobook, produced and distributed by Gildan Media, a division of Recorded Books, in partnership with Sandler Training. Motivational Management, The Sandler Way, by Mike Crandall, narrated by Pratt. We hope you enjoy this program. Forward. David Sandler, the founder of our company, used to say, "People come to work for their reasons, not ours." That's the underlying principle of Mike Crandall's new book, Motivational Management, The Sandler Way. To get the most from your organization, you need to understand why people show up for work and tie that reason to your company's mission. This book is about motivating yourself, your team, and your company at optimum levels by leveraging the inside and outside forces that inspire people to take action. In this book, Mike has given managers of salespeople, and indeed all managers, an important set of tools. Motivational Management the Sandler Way includes practical tips for managers who want to do the following. 1. Understand why most motivational and incentive programs fail. 2. Rebuild a failing incentive program into one that works. 3. Understand the behavioral wiring of your team. And 4. Implement the Sandler success principles with your organization. This breakthrough book will show you how to hire differently, coach differently, and empower your team to reach the highest levels of success. David H. Mattson, President and CEO, Sandler Training. Introduction. Why listen to this book? If you're like most managers we at Sandler Training work with, you have, at some point or another, been frustrated by the ongoing responsibility to motivate your employees. We find that almost all managers struggle with this, especially those who manage salespeople. Maybe you've become frustrated because some people never seem to be motivated, or because some team members are more difficult to motivate than others, or because there are people who report to you who seem motivated part of the time, but not all of the time. These are all things managers struggle with. So if this is you, know that you are not alone. Keep listening. Is what you're doing now working? As a speaker, I get asked to talk about many things. One of my favorite and most requested topics is a talk I do called Why You Fail at Motivating Your Employees. The title always seems to get listeners' attention, perhaps because it serves as a wake-up call. Most managers I talk to sense, at some level, that what they're doing right now to motivate their people simply is not working. Perhaps you sense something similar in your world. I'd like you to consider that issue, why people fail at motivating their employees, as the guiding inquiry as we begin this journey together. This journey will examine both the best and the worst ways to motivate a team. Using that as a starting point, I'd like you to pose to yourself 2 reality check questions as we begin. 1. Why do people usually fail when it comes to motivating employees, in particular salespeople? And 2. What should they do instead? In making my own attempt to answer those questions, I'm going to be recommending many ideas and action items that have their roots in the work of David Sandler, creator of the Sandler Selling System methodology. Some of what you find here will be new to you. Some might feel familiar. In the latter case, I would ask you to make a conscious effort not to fall into the "we already tried that" trap. All too often, this response is what keeps people and organizations from moving out of their comfort zones and into the next phase of growth. People come to work for their reasons, not ours. One of the critical Sandler selling principles is people buy for their reasons, not ours. It's just as true that employees show up at work each day for their own unique reasons, and not the manager's. If you're a manager and your aim is to motivate someone, your job is to find out what that unique reason is. This sounds like common sense, but in my experience, it's an idea that is very rarely implemented. Many of the managers I talk to assume that everyone on their team will be motivated by exactly the same thing, This is hardly ever the case. People are complicated, and salespeople, in my experience, are particularly complicated. If you want to find out what motivates them, you need to build up a trusting relationship, and then you have to have a series of private discussions about what's important to them as individuals. Count on it. Something is. Once you identify that something, you can create a unique incentive that works for that individual. Not before. One coach I talked to recently told me a story I will never forget. A salesperson, we'll call him Jack, had been stuck in a performance plateau for many months. Cash incentives on their own didn't motivate him. The possibility of a vacation trip didn't either. Team events, parties and such, had no impact at all. A question inevitably arose. Was Jack's plateau permanent? No. This coach eventually figured out through one-on-one conversation that Jack wanted to be able to buy a nice diamond ring so that he could propose to the woman he hoped would become his fiancée. Once the coach heard about that, some new possibilities emerged. The idea of being able to afford the right ring, the coach thought, could motivate Jack. What kind of a ring did Jack have in mind? How much would it cost? And when did Jack want to pop the question? Things started to happen very fast once the coach asked about these issues. Within just a few weeks, the plateau was a thing of the past. Jack beat his quota that quarter. Notice that the discussion became a productive one once the manager addressed the reality that Jack was motivated by something he wanted to have. That, as we will hear a little later on in the book, is one of the 5 prime human motivators. It's not the only one, and there are lots of different variations on how the to-have motivator expresses itself. In this case, it was powerful because it connected to an engagement ring, a purchase that really meant something to Jack. It's also important that money, that green stuff you might generally assume to be the ultimate motivator when it comes to getting people to do what you want, only played a supporting role in this story. Jack's turnaround wouldn't have taken place if the coach hadn't identified something unique within Jack's world that money could do for Jack, something specific it could allow him to have. Indeed, many of the most powerful potential incentives that emerge as being effective for individual salespeople, recognition, for instance, have very little to do with money. When it comes to motivation, it helps to think of each individual as a one-of-a-kind puzzle. Once you begin to think of your one-on-one conversations with that person as opportunities to solve that puzzle, you realize that, how do I motivate my team member, is really the wrong question. A better question is, what does the team member want from life? It's by posing that kind of question that you encounter new perspectives on motivation. All too often, when you say to yourself, I already tried that, what you really mean is, I tried to make the person excited about a reason that matters to me, not a reason that matters to him. Whenever you come across an idea here that you feel you've heard before, my challenge to you would be to step back and ask yourself, 1. Have I personalized this idea to a single individual? 2. Have I implemented this idea or tool fully in my organization such that I could teach someone else how to use it successfully? 3. If not, how can I execute this principle more fully than I already am? And finally, 4. How can I implement this idea in such a way that it helps to make our company a destination employer, the sort of workplace where the best and the brightest want to be? That's exactly what learning to motivate your people effectively can do. You can turn your organization into the kind of outfit where the very best people want to work and want to keep working. If you're willing to take on this challenge, if you're willing to change your current patterns of behavior, attitude, and technique, and if you're willing to approach this subject with an open mind, you're in the right place. Does this book only work for sales teams? Although the Sandler brand is strongly associated with sales, and has been delivering measurable, positive results to sales managers' companies, both large and small, for many years, what follows here is also relevant to anyone responsible for the management of any team, regardless of role or position. Once you accept the challenge of applying the principles defined here, and by using the action items you will find at the end of each chapter, you will improve employee productivity, retention, and customer satisfaction. That's a promise. If those outcomes are what you're looking for, please keep listening. The Basics. Chapter 1. Simple, not easy. If you can't explain it to a 6-year-old, you don't understand it yourself. Albert Einstein. It's common for managers to confuse the concept of simple with the concept of easy. Take, for instance, the act of breaking rocks with a hammer. That concept is extremely simple, but the task is not easy. Members of prison chain gangs used to spend years or decades on that task, and I doubt any of them looked forward to it. Of course, you'd be correct if you said that what they were doing was simple, but you'd be incorrect if you maintained that what they were doing was easy. Lots of things in the Sandler Selling System are like that. Motivation, the subject of this book, is no exception. What I want to share with you is based on some very, very simple ideas. Executing those ideas consistently is a matter of practice and reinforcement, and it takes effort. It isn't necessarily going to be easy, but I can promise you that, unlike breaking rocks with a hammer, it will be worth the effort. 2 little girls. Let me begin by telling you a story about 2 little girls. Maria and Amy are each about to enter kindergarten. Each little girl is thinking about the new school year, which commences tomorrow morning. Maria can't sleep well. Amy can't sleep well. Maria can't sleep because she's so excited about the next day. Amy can't sleep because she's so scared about the next day. Here's the moral of the story. Those are 2 very different situations. If all you knew was that the 2 little girls were having trouble getting to sleep, you wouldn't have the whole picture. There are 2 separate reasons for what's going on, even though from a distance you might think that what's going on is the same. Think about the parents in those situations. Think about the messaging a parent might use to help the child get to sleep. What is going to be the most effective? To answer that question, you need to figure out which little girl you're talking to, Maria or Amy. Much of what you will be hearing about here has to do with what I believe is the manager's single most important job: identifying and leveraging internal motivators. You have to figure out what they really are. You have to understand them. You have to respond appropriately. You have to learn how to see beyond the surface similarities of the people you work with, because those surface similarities can be deceiving. In other words, you have to figure out not just that the little girl is having trouble getting to sleep, but why she's having trouble getting to sleep. Motivating others is a challenge. Nobody ever said motivating employees was going to be easy. It's tough. A big part of the challenge is that it's sometimes not at all clear about what is meant by the word motivation. I can't tell you how often I am contacted by a manager who says, "Hey, come in for an event. We've got our annual sales meeting coming up. Can we hire you for a couple of hours so you can motivate the team?" I respond with something like this. "Okay, let's talk about that. What do you mean by motivate them? How would you know that they were motivated if you did motivate them?" There's usually a little pause, followed by some variation on, "Well, we get them excited, get them fired up." Okay, fired up to do what? Sell more, I guess. The conversation goes on like that for a couple of minutes, and beyond agreeing that salespeople should want to sell, which I wouldn't dispute, what we find out is that the manager hasn't really articulated for himself what he wants me to accomplish during the couple of hours I'm supposed to be motivating the team. This is a problem. When I ask what the company has done to motivate people in the past, I usually hear something like this. We have an annual sales meeting, and every year we bring in some kind of a motivational speaker. He gets the team feeling good about the company, and the energy in the room goes up. When he's done, people are all ready to go out and sell. So, he motivates them, that speaker? Yes. Well, we think so. But now they're not motivated anymore. No. It generally doesn't last very long, to tell you the truth. So, I hope you don't mind my asking this, but why are you having this conversation again? If you've done it so many times and it keeps on not lasting very long, is that really motivation? Then there's another pause. A long pause. The Einstein factor. A concept often attributed to Albert Einstein is that definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. Sometimes managers who stick to what's familiar when it comes to motivating the team seem to me to fall into this trap. I honestly don't think speeches during annual meetings motivate most people in any meaningful sense of the word. But that's what happens at so many for-profit and non-profit organizations. Speeches and pep rallies. They think they just need to bring somebody in for a few hours to put on a good show and fire up the team. It happens year after year. Nothing much really changes. And no one ever sits down and asks, wait a minute, what do we mean by motivate? Part of the reason I wrote this book was to move beyond that very limited framework. I believe that motivation is more than sending people to a pep rally and then expecting them to hit their targets or do their job better as a result of that attendance. I also believe motivation is a deeply personal issue, not something you do with 100 people at a time. My aim is to share the personalization process with you here. All too often, managers fall victim to the pep rally mentality. At high school, everyone gathers together for a rally, and the cheers are loud for a little while. But 2 weeks later, nobody remembers what the score of the game was. That's not the right model. In high school, you might have 10 pep rallies before 10 different games. In business, typically, you have just one meeting, once a year, that's supposed to serve as the pep rally. It doesn't deliver the desired results, but many people are afraid to say that out loud. Both for-profit and non-profit organizations I work with struggle with that. Traditionally, management assumes that what motivates one person will motivate everyone. Also, traditionally, management does the bulk of its motivational planning in the short term, on a very superficial level. I believe you've got to go that layer deeper. I believe that if you want to motivate an individual, you've got to make it easy for that person to talk about goals and take action collaboratively with others to attain those goals. That's a significant cultural challenge for most organizations with which I work. And by the way, here's what I mean when I say motivation. Motivation is identifying and leveraging incentives that are meaningful to a particular individual. Here comes the part where you have to be honest with yourself. Often you may think you know what motivates someone, but you really don't. You may see the symptom of what's taking place in that person's life, the tip of the iceberg, if you will. But the cause of what's happening lies well beneath the surface. Until you have a deeper understanding of what's really going on under the water, you will only be guessing at which incentives will motivate which person. You will, far more often than not, be wrong. You may not know at first exactly why the little girl can't sleep. You may not know at first how to identify or leverage meaningful incentives that connect with a particular individual. The idea is simple, but following it isn't always easy. I'd like to be able to promise you that following it will become second nature to you in the same time it would take a motivational speaker to deliver a funny, exciting speech. but I can't. I can promise you, though, that getting better at this essential management skill, over time, is far easier and better for everyone than what happens most of the time. Guessing wrong and watching as good people underperform and or head out the door. Asking questions, taking action. I've created question and action boxes at the end of each chapter, starting with this one. Whenever you hear me go through one of these boxes, please consider asking yourself whether there was content in the chapter that resonated with you and whether you want to find a way to get better in any of the areas we looked at together. If so, please take a few minutes to answer the questions on a separate piece of paper or in a notebook before you move on to the next chapter. Questions. 1. What is something your organization did in the past in an effort to motivate employees? And 2. Think of a time when someone tried to motivate you and failed. What happened? Chapter 2. Understanding how people grow. No one is born fully formed. It is through self-experience in the world that we become what we are. Paulo Freire, Brazilian educator. Back when I worked as a sales manager, I told myself that I was really good at motivating people. Later, I found out how incorrect I was. What I was actually good at was scaring people. I feel bad about that misunderstanding now. Fear isn't the most effective way to motivate anyone. Instead, human beings are motivated by growth. Here's the thing it took me a while to figure out. Motivating people is all about helping them to grow. Human beings grow in 5 stages. They are awareness. The first stage is awareness. This is what happens when you start asking yourself the question, how do I become more dialed into what's going on around me? For managers, awareness is very important. For instance, if you're not aware that scaring your employees into doing what you want doesn't produce the results you're after, you're probably going to continue to do it. Knowledge. The second stage is knowledge. You get knowledge from sources like this book or from working with a coach. Knowledge is fine as far as it goes. The problem is most people stop there. A lot of employers get knowledge about a topic, motivating employees, for instance, and then never do anything with it. Application. The third stage is application. That's where you take the knowledge and actually do something with it. And by the way, that doesn't happen just by listening to this book or any other book. It doesn't happen automatically when you go to a seminar or a presentation. The application phase of learning happens when you do something different than what you have been doing. In this case, in the area of motivating your team, specifically, your sales team. Skill development. The fourth stage is skill development. The very first time you do something new, it doesn't usually feel super smooth. In fact, it feels awkward and uncomfortable, and the results aren't always something to brag about. You have to practice a new skill repeatedly in order to make it stick. And habit. The fifth stage, the one we are working towards together in this book, is habit. That's about repetition and reinforcement and making the positive behavior second nature. Habits are things you do and say without even thinking about them. A good way to tell whether something is a habit is if you struggle to communicate it to other people who ask you how it's done. During my talks, I will ask audiences, how many of you know how to tie your shoes? Of course, all the hands go up. Then I ask, let's think about what's happening there. You put your shoes on and you lace them up. Do you consciously think about tying them? Everybody says, no. Then I say, here's how you know that's a habit. How many of you have had to help a child, a son, a daughter, a niece, a nephew, learn to tie a shoe? A bunch of hands go up. I continue. I'm going to guess that was at least a slightly frustrating process because it was a habit for you. Maybe there was even a little more than slight frustration. Maybe you found yourself thinking or saying, "This is actually really simple. Why can't you get this?" Here's where it gets interesting. Most really good salespeople, most of the top producers in all industries, fail spectacularly when management tries to turn them into sales managers. The impossibility of transmitting a habit telepathically is a big part of the reason why. Someone comes along and says, "Jim, you're our top salesperson, and you are now the sales manager. Go duplicate yourself." Jim tries to explain to somebody how to tie a shoe, and he finds he can't do it. What Jim really has is a set of habits that were beneficial to him as a salesperson. That's not the same thing as knowing how to communicate those habits or replicate them effectively. That's a whole different habit set, and developing it begins with a trait that takes some time to develop: self-understanding. Here's where it gets challenging. As a manager, if you want to have a positive impact on the habits of others, and I hope you do, you have to start by understanding your own motivation. You can't really expect to change anyone else's habit pattern if you don't understand what changes yours. I know, for instance, that material things don't matter to me as much as they do to some other people. I'm much more driven by the desire to be known for something. That's a whole different objective. So let's assume I'm a salesperson working for you. You're going to have some problems if you assume that the best way to change my habit set is to wave dollar bills in front of my face. If you are a manager and you don't understand what motivates yourself, you're never going to figure out what motivates your people. Even once you do understand what motivates you, you have to understand that what works for you might not work for everyone on your staff. For instance, you might have been motivated by pep rallies, but that doesn't mean everyone who reports to you is going to be motivated by pep rallies. When you begin to bridge that gap, you open the door to success. I hope the material that follows brings you closer to understanding what you are motivated by, so you can get better at noticing what motivates someone else. The 5 critical human motivators. Everyone is unique when it comes to charting a personal growth path. Everyone has a distinctive personal style for mastering something new, something that is important, or something that has to change and change for the better. Even given that uniqueness, however, our company's founder, David Sandler, observed years ago that there is a relatively small number of predictable reasons that human beings opt to put in the effort necessary to move from awareness to knowledge to application to skill development and finally into habit. Following Sandler's principles, I believe that at any given point, a person is likely to lean into one of 5 critical human motivators when it becomes evident that it's time to grow and change. The 5 motivators are: 1. To do. Some people are motivated by the possibility of achieving a certain goal for its own sake. Think of the mountain climber who wants to reach the peak of the mountain because it is there, or the employee who wants to take a vacation to a tropical destination she's been dreaming of for years. 2. To be. Some people are motivated by the possibility of self-actualization, becoming the best and highest version of themselves as possible. Think of the best-selling author who has dozens of New York Times bestsellers and millions of dollars in the bank and is focused like a laser beam on making the next book his best book ever, becoming a better writer than he has ever been. 3. To have. Some people are motivated by the possibility of owning something specific or attaining a certain financial reward. Think of the employee who gets a higher-paying job because he wants to earn enough money to buy his fiancée an engagement ring. 4. To accomplish. Some people are motivated by a specific mission, experience, or life lesson that drives them to make a distinctive personal contribution in a particular area.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?